Everyone.
Good afternoon, too.
Oh, good afternoon. I've been here for a while, haven't I?
Thank you.
So I wanted to thank you guys for letting me come in to testify this morning. Well, I came in this morning. It's afternoon now. So I actually am a former Wisconsin resident. I drove up here from Fort Wayne, Indiana, however, this morning. I am probably what you'd call transient, I guess. I've lived in 3 states over the last 12 or so years. My wife and I have lived in 7 different houses during that period of time. We move a lot. My kids are pretty used to going to different school districts. And one of the reasons why is, when I introduce myself, I'm Travis Maassen, felon, basically. That's the part that I forgot to mention when I introduced myself, is that I have a felony. And that piece of information is really important to know about me because that really dictates my whole life. 16 years ago, at 3 a.m., a gentleman came into my bedroom and started playing practical jokes on me. I retrieved a .22 caliber rifle, chased him out of my bedroom. A scuffle ensued. I was beat with a baseball bat. Basically, lots of bad stuff happened. But in that particular instance, at age 19, I was charged with a felony for reckless endangerment. And after sitting here today, I've actually learned that my felony would not be considered under this bill. So my testimony is only for the people that have felonies that are not mine, because I apparently would still be a felon. So after this, but I wanted everybody to just think about, times that you've done something wrong in your own life. And I'm sure that, the Milwaukee County police officer actually asked how many people, have committed crimes that they haven't been caught for, or, things like that. And, even when you're committing a crime, my particular instance was a crime of passion where I had something happen and I had to immediately react to defend myself. Thanks to Scott Walker's administration, that's actually legal now. Wisconsin has the Castle Doctrine where you are actually legally allowed to use a firearm to defend yourself in your own home now, thankfully. As was the case when I was charged, you are not allowed to use a firearm to defend yourself in your own home. So, this bill does open up a lot of opportunities. I think one of the senators said, there's lots of opportunities for felons to get jobs. Yes, there are. If you want to work for $10 an hour at Ashley Furniture, and I'll mention their name because I have actually worked for Ashley Furniture. They do hire felons, and you could probably get a decent job as a felon at Ashley Furniture, so I appreciate them doing that. But it's also a tool that employers use to discriminate. And one thing that happens a lot, and a lot of people in this room, if they're a felon, have heard the word pre-adverse action notice, which is what happens when an employer offers you a job and they say, you are a wonderful candidate, we'd love to have you here, but we'd like to take a background check and a drug screen. And it's that background check that really gets you. Because you could be the perfect candidate. I've been a network administrator for 20 years. I went to college, and I've actually been a network administrator for some of the largest companies in the country. Just to name a couple names, I work for Walmart, Love's Travel Stops, Target. You could name off a lot of Fortune 100 companies, and I work in their network department. I work in the most secure buildings. But there's some places that I can't go, and there's some jobs that I can't do. And I know this because I've applied for them all. A couple of the jobs I can't do when you're a felon is you can't be an Uber driver. You can't drive for Lyft. You cannot drive for DoorDash. You cannot drive for Postmates. You can't be a police officer, for obvious reasons, I guess. But you can't drive for Instacart. In the state of Wisconsin, you actually can't be a bartender because anybody that has a felony conviction cannot have a public license. So in the state of Indiana, I can actually be a bartender. You can't own a bar in the state of Wisconsin either. You cannot serve in the military in any capacity, regardless of what the situation is, because if you have a felony, you cannot be in the military. You cannot work as a pawnbroker. It doesn't make sense, but I could continue to list, but everybody in here knows the jobs that they can't have. They don't need to hear additional things that they can't do with their life. Because at sentencing and, when you're a 19-year-old kid, nobody tells you about the unintended consequences of your criminal conviction that you have. And one of the senators that was a defense attorney mentioned that having a good attorney at trial is integral to success. I did not have a good attorney at trial. I had a public defender. My parents did not have the money to give me a good lawyer, and I basically was on my own. When I walked in this building this morning, I read a document, and you may recognize these words. It says, Equality, Inherent Rights, Section 1. All people are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights. Among those are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. To secure those rights, governments are instituted, deriving the powers from the consent of the governed. You guys all sit up there because we voted for you to be in that position. That's something that not every felon gets the opportunity to do. Thankfully, I was able to vote. But I actually can't sit at that desk. I cannot serve as a senator or a member of the assembly, or I cannot hold any elected position in the state of Wisconsin because I'm a felon. I can be a U.S. senator, though, however, and I don't know how many people in the building know that, but I can actually serve as a U.S. senator, so I can actually become somebody more important than you guys. And I still can't change this law, no matter what I do. And if I told you that there's a person in this world that's more important than the President of the United States, you'd look at me like I was crazy, right? There's no one that's more important than the President of the United States. But if Joseph Biden or Donald Trump were the President and he were standing here today, he could not give me a pardon for my crime. Because you know what? The President of the United States cannot give somebody a pardon for a state-level crime. So Tony Evers has an office in this building, to me, technically, is the most powerful and the most important person in the entire world. And I've now learned by being in this hearing that I won't be able to get an expungement for my record, but I can only hope that somebody hears my story and tells Tony to give me a pardon, because I've now learned that's my only choice at having makes basically rights that I was promised in the Wisconsin State Constitution. So, I shouldn't have done my crime. You'll say, I made a mistake. I grew up in a broken home. My parents were divorced when I was 12. I lived with my grandparents when I was 14, and I moved on my own when I was 17. I am basically the quintessential not perfect kid, and I'm still not perfect today. I'm 35 years old, and I'm still realizing how broken I am. I used to wear all of these things as a point of pride for me. I used to tell people about all the businesses I've started and how many places I've lived and how many amazing things that I've done, but I never tell anybody that I'm a felon. And I just, I don't understand why I don't start with that, because it is so important to your whole life when you become a felon that you should just wear a shirt that identifies you to everyone for the rest of your life that you're a felon, because no matter what I do, I will never, unless I get a pardon from the governor of the state of Wisconsin at this point, not be a felon. And no matter how good a network administrator I am, I'm never going to work at the Department of Justice, a place in Wisconsin where I could have had a job, but I couldn't get hired, obviously because of my background. I could have been hired by the Wisconsin Department of Corrections this year to be a network administrator. I did not get that job because of my criminal background. I actually had to pay more money for my life insurance because of my criminal background. I don't know if you guys knew that, but if you ever have a criminal background and you'd like to have life insurance or disability insurance, you will pay more money for your insurance premiums. If you'd like to have a mortgage to buy a house, you're going to have to discuss that with your mortgage broker, and they're going to want a full disclosure of every crime that you've ever committed. As a matter of fact, right now there's probably some page in this building that's typing my name into Google right now. I'm used to having my name Googled. I get Googled a lot. And one of the first search results that you're going to find when you Google my name is my crime. And even if my record is expunged, you'll still be able to, for the rest of my life, Google me and see what I've done. So, I guess with that, that's basically my testimony. I had wrote down a bunch of things that I wanted to talk to you about, like how I had a job actually at a hospital as network administrator, and I was actually working there for a year. And because the state of Minnesota actually does a evaluation of people's backgrounds that work in the healthcare industry, I was actually had to leave that job. I actually had the job for a year where I worked with patients and staff members and managed a critical care access hospital, 1,600 people. But I had to be removed from the job because of a criminal conviction. That had already happened, and I had already been working. I also last year had been offered a job at Stark County to work as the basically network administrator for the county. That requires something called CJIS access, CJIS, Criminal Justice Information System. If you have anything to do with any kind of information that does anything to do with criminal justice, you cannot work with that system. And if you have a felony, like me, you can't work with any contractor that also works with criminal justice information systems. So that means, maybe your employer has a police department, like my former employer had a police department as a client. I can't work for that employer anymore because CJIS requirements, federal law, dictates that anybody that has access to the FBI Criminal Justice Information Database cannot be a felon. And it doesn't matter what you do or say, you're always going to be a felon. So I ask you, after this hearing, if any of you guys have any ideas as to what I could do for a job, besides, working for myself or, trying to apply. And actually, one of the senators said, well, we have this protection of equal rights in the state of Wisconsin, right? If you're a felon, you cannot be denied access to a job if the circumstances don't substantially relate to the crime that you're convicted of. And the thing about that is you have to go through a year process. And when Scott Walker was the governor, he actually removed any criminal or any penalties for those employers that discriminate. So when you take an employer who's discriminated against you and wrote it on your application, not hired due to felony, they don't actually face any financial penalties. The worst case scenario after a year is that they have to hire you, and who wants to be hired for a job that, the state forced them to hire you for? So I guess I'll end with that and take any questions that you guys may have.
Questions for Travis?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Was that Senator Roy's?
It is.
Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Senator.
but I would like to be in line also.
Okay, you're on deck then, Lena.
I just want to thank you so much for your testimony. This is one of the most incredible hearings that I've ever been involved in. And I know that you wrote to my office as well, and I just wanted to say that we certainly would be happy to help facilitate your application for a pardon. And I think the fact that you felt so passionately about this bill that you wanted to come testify and then found out that it wouldn't apply to you underscores just how judicious the approach that we're taking right now is. And it will provide help to many Wisconsinites, but there are a lot of deserving people out there who won't even get the chance under this bill. So I really thank you for your time and your passion, and my office is open to assisting you in getting some relief. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Unfortunately, in Wisconsin right now, you actually cannot apply for a pardon if you've been convicted of a subsequent offense. And unfortunately, I have been convicted of a subsequent offense because another thing that I did not mention is when you have a felony and you encounter law enforcement and they run your record and they discover that you have a felony, there's this little bit of a thing where they kind of treat you a little differently. And another interesting fact that I'll mention is if you're a felon and you are in the state of Minnesota and you have, property and you have friends that come over to shoot a gun and a firearm is discharged and a bullet, not even a shell casing is left in your property, and somebody calls the sheriff's department and the SWAT team comes and they flashbang your house and they arrest you at your job. That's actually happened to me in 2016. It's against the law for a felon to possess a spent shell casing in the state of Minnesota. So if you're a felon and you happen to have a shell casing and you live in Minnesota, you're going to want to make sure that you don't do that either, because that's an additional felony. And I've learned that, based on the fact, like I said, I've been arrested by the SWAT team twice now, and those flashbangs are not friendly. So I appreciate that. But
Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let you know that it was actually legislators that did the Castle Doctrine, and you actually could not do any pardon under Governor Walker. And I just wanted to correct that, but also thank you for your testimony.
Senator Jacques.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, first, if I could just ask Ledge Counsel to clarify the difference between a pardon and an expungement under the law. I know it's been an issue that even the current Attorney General has brought up in relation to, specifically with Second Amendment, the right to, with concealed carry or different things. If you could just respond.
Sure. I mean, just very generally, a pardon is sort of an act of official forgiveness for a crime and restores most of the civil rights that a person loses when they're convicted of a crime. Expungement in the state of Wisconsin refers to essentially the sealing of the court record. So a person who has the record of his or her offense expunged in Wisconsin remains convicted of that offense, but the court record is sealed.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for, I guess. And I believe under this bill as well, a subsequent offense would also disqualify you from being able to get something expunged?
Right, that's correct. And I should have mentioned, too, that a person who has the record of his or her offense expunged, then if there are, you mentioned Second Amendment issues, a person who has the record of his or her offense expunged would not regain his or her right to possess a firearm. So those types of civil rights are not restored through an expungement, whereas a pardon would restore.
In other words, my understanding has been that expungement doesn't make it as if something hasn't happened. It just basically mitigates it somewhat. I mean, in this case, it's less visible, like you'd said, but because it's sealed. But it's not eliminated. Versus pardons tend to take away the actual effects of having committed the crime or the conviction, I guess. So, for instance, if you have, say, a licensing requirement for a state board or for some national entity, nonprofit crediting entity or something like that, getting something expunged is not necessarily going to qualify them for whatever licensing issue they might have because of a previous conviction.
Under current law, you are correct. Under SB 78, an offense, the record of which has been expunged, is not considered a conviction for the purposes of employment and state agency licensing.
Can I ask you a question after you're done?
Sure.
Yes, you may.
To clarify that, right now, currently, if you have a felony, Right now, if you have a felony conviction, you're not able to qualify for a license for certification, or just qualify for a license for employment issues.
Like an LPN.
Right.
Correct.
You can't be a bartender if you have a felony in
Correct.
Wisconsin. You cannot hold any professional license.
Okay, thank you. Well, that to me is, excuse me, are you done?
I did have a further question.
Go ahead.
But it's,
No, go ahead.
So I guess in your testimony, sir, you had referenced that if you were to be Googled, your offense would come up. People would be aware. And so it's kind of like, obviously people might be aware through CCAP currently, but there's certainly other ways of gaining information that might be unhelpful to the job prospects for an individual, whether that's looking at social media posts or, other information that, again, is not hidden in today's society in terms of an internet search. I guess my question would be, you wouldn't want to be in a job because the state forced the employer to hire you for that job. You'd want it to be something that they voluntarily would like to do. I guess, I almost look at it in terms of, I support a number of things related to expungement and expanding expungement, but I also believe that there is value to showing that rehabilitation and going to an employer that actually, hires you with the full knowledge of the situation, and as opposed to being, forced into, as I kind of with the earlier testimony, asked about, to what extent are people going to be in a roundabout way trying to figure out the same information as opposed to directly asking about, whether or not you have a conviction.
Right. I appreciate that question a lot. And actually, it makes me think of something that I wanted to talk about too earlier when we were talking about this. And one thing I found that's helpful for me with my situation is to be very upfront and honest with everybody all the time. So if I'm applying for a job and they ask me if I've convicted a crime, I have my conviction list. I provide that to them. I have a little document that I copy and paste to make it easy, make sure I get all the details right. Because I actually found out if you actually provide the wrong information, like a date is wrong or something, that's actually also grounds for not being hired by an employer. So that's another thing. But I am very open and honest, and I guess, I've, for better or for worse, had to wear this felony as a badge of pride. I don't know, that sounds really weird to say it, but I have to look at what I've done since my felony, and I use those things to talk to employers, So I talk about how I went back to college and how I've raised a family. I mean, one thing I didn't talk about is I have a daughter, and she's 13 years old. I was actually convicted and became a felon when I was 16 years ago, so 3 years before she was born. And I mean, if you just even take me out of the equation here and you say, well, you're a felon and you're going to be a felon for the rest of your life, it actually, my felony impacts my daughter now too, because I now can't get those jobs. And, it's totally unfair to her, but, we've been put in this socioeconomic situation where, I mean, I theoretically can get a job anywhere. I'm a network engineer, and my hourly rate, I bill out over $100 an hour. And so I make a ton of money. I actually really don't need to necessarily even have a job. I own 3 of my own companies right now. I own M6 Networks, I own M6 Music Store, and I'm opening another recruiting company right now. So, by the fact, I'm self-employed, so, I don't have to be discriminated against. But the interesting thing about this is I listen to these people talk about it, and I think about this is, as an employer, I actually kind of like discrimination. And you're going to think that's weird because I'm a felon, but it actually gives me an advantage to take advantage of people. And I was just watching a documentary where there's a trailer park in Florida, and she only brings in people that are convicted of sexual offenses because they can't find anywhere else to live. That's another aspect of being a felon that I didn't talk about either, is you can't even rent a house because, everybody asks, about your criminal history. And another case where you have to be just upfront and completely honest about it with people. But even if, let's just say a perfect world, my original felony never happened, I'll still have a criminal conviction, So I'm still going to be a criminal, but it's not going to be a felony. And I think that's another thing that I differentiate is, like, people can make mistakes, right? You can do stuff and you can go to jail and you can get a crime, and those are generally referred to as misdemeanors. And you can actually be a police officer with a misdemeanor. You can do lots of stuff and be a cop, but you cannot have a felony. That's like just that automatic bar. And, I could write a book about all the jobs I could have had. I have a cell phone full of companies that won't hire me just because I have a felony. And it's really a bad decision on their part, because I think if you ask the companies that did take a chance and knew my full history, like you said, there are companies, and I named them, that have hired me. My last employer, General Aluminum, knew full well that I was a felon, and they hired me anyways. But they also got a tax break because the government gives companies money to hire felons. And so do I want to be hired because I check that box that I'm the felon either? So I guess, one thing about this bill, the 1 year thing, this has been 16 years for me. I wish I could have sped this up and not had to have this adversity for the last 15 years of my life. My daughter I'd probably be a homeowner. I'm not a homeowner. I'm 35 years old, but I don't own a home. I've got like $100 in the bank. If at any given moment, if I want to borrow money, I got to go to the bank, right? And banks, they discriminate against people with criminal records. So it's just, I guess, the stigma of it protrudes no matter, even if I, got rid of it. It's like you said, people are still going to be able to Google me. But when they talk to me about it, I can talk to them like you and me talk now. But when there's this blanket thing on a background check, that never even gets past the HR department. So we don't even get to have the conversation because HR throws me in the garbage because, I had that criminal conviction. Hope that answers the question.
Well, I appreciate the response. I guess, and I think HR managers certainly reevaluate their policies over time. I guess, my thought is just if you have an employer who's willing to take a chance on an employee based on the conversation and understanding that they might be different from at the point at which they committed any sort of a criminal act, I guess there's a difference, though, between talking to an employer and the employer saying, well, gee, why haven't you gotten this license? We'd be able to move you into this position. Well, actually, I can't get this license because I have, something that bars it. I think, there's a difference between working with an employer and an individual to resolve a licensing situation legally through, an appeals process or through legislation like this, versus saying that, you can't have that conversation about, providing that information, to the employer up front. Because like I said, at least I know that there are folks that have, good paying jobs available for people that have been through the correction system. I don't know if people even remember there was a State of the State address a few years back. And there were a number of people up by the governor. One of them happened to work in my district, and he had a criminal record. He was a welder, but he went through the training to get himself in a position where obviously welders are very much in demand. But I have a lot of employers that I think demonstrated to me that that stigma or whatever else that it's not off-putting to a lot of employers. It's trusting the employer to be able to have that conversation, and again, not because they feel forced to. But I appreciate the testimony.
One thing that helps me a lot is if you look at me, I'm white, so it's really easy for me to get a job because I'm white. I have this thing called white privilege. If employers meet me and they see me, they'll hire me with a felony. If you took a look at how many people don't get a job that have a felony that are people of color, I think you see the statistic will be dramatically different than what you see with, we're just one of the boys that we got in trouble or whatever. And, my name's, obvious. You can look me up on the internet. I'm on LinkedIn, whatever. I have a lot of advantages. I'm very smart. I'm very articulate. I have a lot going for me. So, yeah, I can get a job anywhere, but that's not everybody. And, just because somebody made a mistake also, maybe 5-10 years ago, maybe they can't articulate that well. The young lady talked about a prior mistake where she had made a theft when she was, very young. And, a lot of people have done bad stuff and then they not get caught for it. Or if they got caught for it, their dad had money for a lawyer and they could get out of it or whatever. And, I guess just my thing is if I had a good job and I make a lot of money, I'm not gonna commit additional crimes. And actually, I think anybody that's been through the system more, than one little time knows that you don't want to be in the criminal justice system. I was lucky. I had a really amazing probation officer who, actually cared about me and tried to take care of me. My mom actually works for the Department of Corrections. My brother works for the Department of Corrections. Most of my people that I talk to associate with are in law enforcement in some variety. But they all also know that I'm a felon too, because they can't hang out with me. If you're a cop, you can't hang out with somebody that's got a felony. That's not going to look good. So I can't even really necessarily positively associate with the kind of people that I'd want to be with because, again, they can Google me or whatever and look at this criminal record.
Well, Travis, thank you for being here and telling your story and driving out from out of state.
Thank you.
It's appreciated. Next up, I had Barbara Sella on.